Good morning and welcome to everybody to the seminar entitled Science in Time of COVID, What Investors Look For in a Changed World. I'm Gianmarco Montanari, I'm General Director of IIT, but a particular welcome to our guest speaker, Gianmario Verona, Rector of Bocconi University. Good afternoon, Gianmario. Gianmario doesn't need any kind of presentation, but let me just say a few words about him. Gianmario is rector of Bocconi University, but is also professor of management specialized on the strategic management of technology and innovation, with a focus on the theme of digital transformation. Before this, he served Bocconi as dean of the faculty, as director of the MBA program, and as director of the PhD in business administration. He is author also of more than 70 academic articles and 5 books, and has published in all leading management journals. We are very proud to have you here with us, Gianmario. Thank you to be with us. Let me also say at the beginning that we are here today in Bocconi in this very, very nice building and with a lot of students, professors. And as IIT, we have a lot of a very strong partnership with Bocconi. The partnership calls for collaboration between the two institutions on startup-related matters and joint seminars and technology and business cross-pollination events, and etc. Practically, the first step of collaboration in the partnership between IIT Startup Project and the Bocconi is with Bocconi for Innovation, B4I, accelerator program, the Bocconi program to accelerate startup and startup ideas. B4I was born last year, is a startup itself, and has a platform with the triple role of pre-accelerator, business accelerator, and place for the development of corporate entrepreneurship here in Bocconi in Milan. The objectives of the Bocconi for Innovation are to attract the highest possible number of talented entrepreneurs, offering a mix of training and resources for the development of their projects, and to facilitate in business development opportunities for startup and large companies here in Milan. Then let me go back just a moment to the seminars. This is the first of few seminars we are organizing here in IIT with a collaboration with very important speakers. And the matters of these seminars is COVID, how we live in COVID period, how we live in we hope, a post-COVID period as soon as possible. We will treat this kind of matter from all different aspects. Today, we start with economy, but we will go through historic matters and social matter and this kind of different aspect of science on the same matter that is COVID. As, let me say, as all of us, also in IIT, our colleagues are facing this very difficult period, and we make science. COVID is influencing science, but at the same time, science is influencing COVID. And we hope, I think everyone hope that we will be able to influence in a positive manner COVID as soon as possible. So this is our first meeting, and we will continue in the next 2 months with the other steps of these meetings. And but now my time is finished. I let the stage to Gianmario, and thank you again for being with us in the first seminar and for hosting us here in Bocconi.
Well, thank you very much, Gianmarco. It's a distinct pleasure to be part of this seminar series. In general, it's a privilege for Bocconi University to partner with IIT, which I personally consider an Italian excellence. And I believe that partnership between hard science and social sciences, which we represent, is something fundamental for the future, which is even part of the talk today. So it's a pleasure also to be here. We have just opened the campus 1 month ago to host students back to campus after this long period of physical lockdown. We are particularly happy because we are also innovating and learning new things in new ways. We are experimenting new ways of teaching, and so this is really an era of ferment, we call it in the literature of history of technology. So it's something that we should, of course, try to also read carefully in terms of opportunities around us, because it's something which will for sure impact also future generation. So basically, the title of the talk for which I've been invited is very broad, and so I thought to just give you with my ideas, and I would like not to talk more than 20 minutes about basically where the economy is going in terms of investment and in terms of interest for in this peculiar period, which is, as we all know, characterized by this exogenous shock, very unimaginable, I would say, up until 9 months ago. And so let me say that paradoxically, this is what I like to say also all the times to people that ask me, paradoxically, there's nothing super new that comes out from this pandemic. Of course, there's something very new for medicine. And so we have learned, for example, that probably we were exposed to problems of this kind with a higher probability than we thought. And so this is something for sure that we have to care for. We have learning, for example, the fact that we can and we should collaborate more, and fortunately enough, in the field of science, and even I would say in modern industrial industries characterized by strong investment in research and development, this type of collaborations are something very clear. But I would say that more generally, there are two core trends that were there already before the pandemic, that simply the pandemic has further enhanced and strengthened, in which I think are really the two directions for the near future. The first one is very basic, because it's what in economics and in management we call the fourth industrial revolution. So the fact that since the mid-90s, we have been exposed to a new technology, which is, the internet technology, which is a mixture of, as you all know, telecommunication, computing technology that put together have created a new form of energy for the entire society, which is particularly good for, of course, for people that work for universities. But the things that we learned starting from the advent of the internet is that the internet was not just for emails and for communication, but it's really an instrument to transfer information and to transfer knowledge. And we have learned that knowledge is at the basis of the new, let's say, it's the new energy for any company and any industry. And so the most important thing is that it's not just a vertical technology, is what technically we call the general purpose technology, is like the typical references to electricity back in the 19th century. So it's an energy which is totally independent from a specific sector, and which, however, this is the core characteristic of the digital transformation, which has brought to the fourth industrial revolution, is the fact that it's reorganizing entirely in any single industry. So this is something which is a fact that we started knowing pretty well at the end of 90s, but at the very beginning, we just saw these in terms of a few sectors. For example, e-commerce was the first sector impacted on this. So the fact that retailing, turned out to be, available also online. And so there was the idea that at some point in time, there would have been, the apocalypse of retail, which is happening in these years, but it's something that actually was already pretty well known at the beginning beginning of the new millennium. But it was not just the retailing, because we have learned this with the publishing industry, for example. We have been reading newspapers and in general magazines online for many years. Of course, there are still newsstands in some countries that are out there, and publishers that publish and produce physical paper. But the point is that this digital transformation, sector by sector, is entirely reorganized in any single industry. And so this was a fact before the pandemic, because, for example, we have seen in the last 4 years also the reorganization of the industry of banking and finance, which, again, with trading online and with other instruments that have been developed, was completely redefined by the development of the digital transformation. We have seen it, for example, in an industry which is very important for Italy, which is the industry of fashion and design, which has been completely redesigned. And basically, starting from the pandemic, we have learned that actually probably the impact of digital transformation, which was even more important than we have realized. Because basically, in fact, with this lockdown, we have learned that basically we could live even without going out from our home. We could continue working with smart working. We could continue buy products and feed ourselves thanks to all the brands that brought products into houses, and we could, although of course in a very complicated manner, continue living despite this. And as a matter of fact, when we watch today, the digits of the growth of corporations that have also leveraged this situation, we see the impressive exponential growth that they had. No? There is this, I don't know if I can mention some company, but this is part also, I guess, of seminars. I think about Zoom, for example, which is one of the many platforms, but the value of Zoom, the capital market value of Zoom is higher than the combination of all the airline companies in the United States, just to have an idea of the impact that the pandemic also gave to digital transformation. And as a matter of fact, I'm thinking about my sector, which thought to be probably independent of the digital transformation. Again, the pandemic has demonstrated that we can do research in an open way. Of course, we have to work in laboratories physically, but we can, of course, continue exchanging information and knowledge pretty decently, actually, thanks to the evolution of the tools. And we can also actually have classes with students, which today we still have, and interestingly today that now we have also students in presence, we mix these modes of in presence and digital interaction thanks to this virtual mode. So the first thing that I would like to remark is that where the finance world is going in terms of investment, well, for sure, it is clear that the digital transformation that was already there before the pandemic has taken a further boost in terms of acceleration, and represents for sure a fundamental pillar for the next 20 years. Because and this is something that probably I know that I speak to very smart and knowledgeable scientists, but sometimes we forget to remember that most of the industries, from the pharmaceutical industry to the fast-moving consumer industries and to the industry that I mentioned before, were more or less all born 150 years ago, essentially. And they were shaped up in a way that we see it today. We see it up until a few months ago. Now the digital transformation is really reshaping these industries, and so of course there is a strong interest for what happens during an industrial revolution. That's why it's called the fourth industrial revolution, entrepreneurship. So the development of new ideas and new startups that bring food to the market of industries. And so the example that I mentioned before related to the digital platform and the zillions of startups that can be developed in terms of artificial intelligence, in terms of development, again, on the application of digital and in general elements of digital technology to any kind of service and to any kind of activity that represents the core of an industry can be highly valuable for the future in term of investment. So this is one pillar that, again, was already there, but now has had a further boost. And just as a final demonstration, just let me very quintessentially represent with 8 of the 10 most important companies in terms of market capitalization today are the companies that are, called out of the acrostic FANGM, which is Facebook, Amazon, Netflix, Apple, Google, and Microsoft. Plus Tencent and Alibaba, which are, as you know, the twins in China. So basically, or the way around, of course, Chinese people may think. So basically, the real point is that, the world for sure is going in that direction, which is a very important direction. There is a second pillar, which is extremely crucial, and particularly for people that have the fortune to do research in science and to even work in the part of applied research that can bring products and value to the market, which is the broad world that I like to call the world of sustainability. That I like to call, but in general, even in literature, in economics and management, is called sustainability. So what is sustainability? Sustainability is many things, and probably the classical thing is whatever has to do with green technologies, right? Whatever impacts positively the environment and is associated with the word green, because it positively impacts the environment. This was a trend that was already there again, because climate change is not something that we have invented during the pandemic. Actually, the paradox, I think that you all know that the paradox during the pandemic is that we learned that, of course, if we shut down factories and if we stop using the cars to commute, and if we stop, of course, going into the center of big cities with the scooters or mopeds that produce pollution, of course, there is an improvement in terms of quality of air that we breathe. So again, nothing new, it's just probably an empirical demonstration, a macro experiment that the world lived, which further demonstrates something that we already knew. There was climate change around, and so green technology is something that is very important for the future. But it's not just about green technology, because when we talk about sustainability, we talk also about all the activities and innovation and inventions that can improve the quality of life of people, and then can improve also the inclusion of people in a world which is characterized by, on the one hand, a bigger globalization, which is bringing us closer and closer, thanks to transportation, thanks to the internet, thanks to the fact that now we are super connected. But at the same time, it also increases the divide between people, and the economic divide within each country, the economic divide between countries. And so this is something very important. And so this broad set of problems, again, we like to call them problems of sustainability. And all technologies, all investments that can substantially enhance this challenge of sustainability are particularly important, and were particularly important before the pandemic. I like to remark all the time that the Z generation, which is the people that was born after 1997, and also the Alpha generation, the people that were born after 2010, are young guys that are, of course, the future of society, but they also have on their heart this type of problems, right? There is this very famous protest of the Fridays for Future that figuratively is represented by Greta Thunberg, that again was something that we already had before the pandemic, and that simply already demonstrated that the world, in a sense, needed to go in that direction. Now, the pandemic, again, further enhanced this type of problem, because enhanced the problem of the environment, because we are realizing this contradiction of modern capitalism that required, again, a strong investment in technologies and in any kind of innovations that can fuel a better world from the viewpoint of the climate and of the environment. On the other hand, the very pandemic has further demonstrated the big divide. And I'm thinking about our country, for example, Italy. And so we have experimented with the lockdown. On the one one end, the fact that many of us could have lived in a similar fashion because they had the perfect technologies at home. But there is a big technological divide for which, people that live in some parts of Italy, people that live in some areas of some regions have less limited use of this technology. And so, for example, students that had to take lessons from schools and universities during the pandemic had a really hard time to attend them because they didn't have the tools to access it. Not to mention the fact that the very pandemic is producing a clear recession, which is nothing to be super concerned about because it was very logical. We have closed the factories for a number of months, so it's natural that the GDP, doesn't stand as last year. But there are problems to, of course, start over, particularly in some sectors. So that's a big issue, and this will mean, of course, unemployment in such sectors. It will mean major problems in the medium run, which will have to be faced. And again, this increases the divide. And this type of divide is seen more dramatically in countries that are, let's say, more that follow in a more traditional form of capitalism. And think about the United States, in which you are living in these days in many cities. A strong problem also in terms of social riot, I would say, and so this also increases again the problem of the divide. So again, the pandemic, did not bring something new to the plate because, again, we knew about the fourth industrial revolution and the digital transformation. We knew about sustainability challenges. Clearly, these two things have been, if I may say, exacerbated by the pandemic because they are even more important for the future. And let me now, after remarking these two things, also point out to something positive which I see around the corner. So the fact that, fortunately, at least for countries in Europe, we have this opportunity to again face concretely this issue with this Next Generation EU fund that the European Commission has brought to the attention of the different countries, which represent really, actually even the way it has been named is very much coherent with what I said, because at the core of this document, and in general, the core of the investment that will be done in the next months, there are three things. There is digital transformation, sustainability challenges, and human capital, which per se is an investment that particularly an institution like IIT, we know is at the basis of any kind of knowledge. So again, the positive things around the corner are that, now there is commitment about important institutions like you in investing along the lines of what I mentioned. And let me also say more broadly that financial markets seem to be in these years particularly focused on investing not necessarily in the usual suspects, which are the classic, strategy of investment in the past years. So public equity and in general traditional forms of debt, but more into private equity and again, investments of this kind. So what I see as a positive, situation in this broad picture is that there is financially the opportunity to really sustain investment in the direction of sectors that will be crucial for the society. Let me conclude before taking, if there are some questions, with the challenges that I see. I see two fundamental challenges in this process. One challenge is a challenge related to the way we work at the scientific level, and we are used to work at the industrial level. And one of the characteristics of the digital transformation and the characteristic also of what I call the sustainability challenges is that they are interdisciplinary in a sense. And what we are experimenting, and what I think, and when I speak to scientists, they understand very well what I'm saying. So typically the characteristic of disciplines in science is to be vertical and to have been developed in a very vertical way. And so this is something which is not simple when you have to face challenges like the ones that we are facing in these days. And so what I see as a fundamental challenge is also developing a culture of interdisciplinarity, something which we are doing in our minimal scale at Bocconi University by, for example, trying to pull computer and data science into all the departments of business and management to let our students know better and understand better the evolution of the different disciplines in a way which is more integrated. And I believe this is something which is a challenge at even a broader levels, because it's very important that, you know, disciplines that sometimes are also away from each other start speaking with each other. And again, to solve puzzles like the pandemic, you know, we are learning that it's very important to bring, you know, scientists of different types all together. And this, I think, is something which is not very simple. And so I believe that is something that we have to learn, and we have to continue working on what, again, we were working before the pandemic, this paradigm of open innovation, this culture of collaboration. This has to be nurtured more and more. The second challenge which I see is not an enemy, but it's the myopia of politics, which sometimes, you know, country by country and not at the macro level, because I just mentioned EU Next Generation Fund is a very positive, long-term looking forward kind of project. But sometimes politics at the local level tend to be myopic. And so, again, to face these type of challenges, you need to have, you know, a long-term approach, and you need to have really an approach which really looks at the future and is able to sustain investment in the short run in order to come up with that. And so this, again, is something that we should fight for. We should, of course, make our voice listened all the times. And we should, of course, try also to impact locally, trying to also expose the ideas in a way that really supports also the good choices, you know, at the regional, territorial, and more macro national level, because again, it is really a moment that provides great opportunity, but at the same time requires also a lot of change of mindset and a lot of commitment, and so it doesn't come, you know, without, of course, a cost. So it's very important that we are aware of that, and we fight, you know, for that. And so that's what I would very briefly say around the very broad topic. But I hope that I took out some of the fundamental drivers. Personally, I think are very important.
Sure. Thank you very much. And I have to say that you already answered to a few of the questions we had. And I remind to everyone that you can send directly to Gianmario question if you had. I take some of the question you already mentioned before, but maybe you can be more specific. One say, I think we are on the eve of difficult times. That means also huge opportunities, as you said also before. Based on what you can watch from your observatory, what's the behavior of the investors during the COVID time? In particular, are they more or less risk appetite is higher or lower than before?
So the impression here that we developed in our different research centers is that it's a very peculiar moment, because there is a lot of liquidity. So that's the characteristic of this moment in time. And so there is the need to invest and to invest in a way which is, of course, consistent with the profile of the different investors. So the peculiarity of the moment is very unique, because there is potentially, you know, a sort of green field, and at the same time, you really have a lot of liquidity. So it's not a scarce resource. And so that's why when I speak particularly to scientists that have some kind of entrepreneurial mindset and that have the interest also to impact the economy and in general the society, I like to say that this is the moment. It's not a case we call it the fourth industrial revolution, because it's really the moment to build up a startup, because you know, money are there. And so again, then of course you have to be visible. You have to try to find your own way. That's the reason why, going back to the beginning of this talk, you mentioned our accelerator. That's the reason why we have had an incubator for 10 years and we decided to become more visible with an accelerator. That's why we think that there are plenty of platforms that can support this process, but this is the moment to do things. And so the appetite is for entrepreneurship in these fields that I mentioned is particularly high. And so there is the opportunity, and so this is really the moment. I wouldn't say now or never, but really it's very hard to think about, let's say, the history of the recent, particularly last 20 years. It's very hard to find a moment which is not even analogous to this one, because even after some of the recent crises that we have experimented, we have always had, a growth which was very, different between countries, and again, boosted by different drivers. Again, here it's like, let me repeat one more time, that's why we call it Fourth Industrial Revolution, which is very horizontal across countries. It refers to sectors of the economy, and we are reinventing them. And if you find a way to reinvent them properly, it's really the right moment.
Thank you very much. You already mentioned about the big tech digital giants. And what we can see today is a growing and expanding size of their stocks, and so also of their power from a point of view. Two questions about this. The first one, are they still correlated to the real life? Is Tesla, just to make a name, already correlated to the value of his enterprise when his value is more than Toyota, Volkswagen, mixed?
Well, this is, markets, that's the way market behave. Right? So the empirical answer is yes. So basically, this is really the point. So the fact that, markets discount for a number of facts, and they try to see the potential as one of the fundamental things. Clearly, you mentioned one company, but that company is clearly in the direction related. So that was one company. Then if I think about Elon Musk, which would be an incredible, potential investor in IIT, right? Because it's not just about Tesla, but it's about 4, 5, 6 other types of technology that go from robotics to, of course, space missions, whatever. So basically, he is investing in things that are actually, is, if you wish, the demonstration of what I was saying. So money are there, and so given the liquidity, then you typically invest, in this case, in the usual suspects, because you know that these guys have a highway in front of them. So if you allow me, this is, in a sense, a demonstration of the fact that money are there, and then the real value of stocks, nobody knows, in the sense that it's an empirical fact. Today, it is that value. So.
That's true. And the other question about that is, but there is still competition. There is a space for competition in this market. Because we are talking to our scientists, we are talking about startups and things like this. But for a young talent coming out from here or from IIT, it's better to find a job in Google or try to have a startup, because competition with these big giants is so difficult today.
I think that, that's a very good question. And let me put it this way, and let me tell you what I also like to say to students at Bocconi. And I like to say to them that this is what we said to them in the welcome days this year, that is the moment also of creating your own startup. And it's better to go creating jobs more than occupying jobs. So basically, I think I took it not from myself, but from Larry Summers, who's been a great rector in the United States and Ministry of the Treasury. But I think it's a great statement, particularly in this moment. He said it in 2007, but it's a great statement, particularly today, because there is opportunity out in the market. And I think that For a scientist or for a person that is educated in economics and business, of course, one thing is a traditional career, to be the scientist and to be, of course, a person that, scales up the activity in a corporation and from junior become a super senior vice president or CEO. And that's great, of course. But the experience that you can create, particularly in terms of, trial and error, soft skills, and also the thing that I was saying before, interdisciplinarity, right? Because again, if you're a scientist, you do that thing straight, very small, tiny for your entire life. If you go working for a corporation and you become a super expert in something, then you become then much better. And then at some point, of course, you have to deal with very problems, but still you have a very defined pathway. If you become an entrepreneur, from day one, you have to become an expert of finance, an expert of marketing, an expert of macro scenario in economics and technology, not only an expert of your field. And so it's also a fantastic gym in terms of development of capabilities. And so we are sponsoring it a lot in our students. We are sponsoring it a lot, the interaction with the technological institution like yours. And I believe that also for scientists is a special moment because, this is part of the culture in the United States, for example. There are many professors at MIT, Caltech, or Stanford that then create their own startups. And I think it's something we have to develop here. Now, the question is also, but you have these giants. Well, first of all, a typical exit of a startup is selling to these guys, right? So to Google, to Amazon, or whatever. And, if I look back to the history of economics, you've always had big leaders, big incumbents that seem to be super powerful and infinitely powerful. And then over the years, things change. I was saying that the first 8 out of the first 10 are digital. Of these 8, in 2005, in terms of market capitalization, there were only 2. And most of the other ones were, for example, related to petroleum, right? British Petroleum, Exxon, oil, so on and so forth. So basically, Saudi Aramco and so, true, they're big incumbents, very strong, but this should not be an element that should, reduce the incentive to do that, even because they could be the buyer of your initiative.
Yeah. I do always 2 examples about this. One is Zoom, as you already mentioned. Who can say 2 years ago, but also last year, that Zoom can do this kind of business when there were Moloch, oligopolistic Moloch like Microsoft or like this? If you think that Microsoft is struggling inside between Teams and Skype, and guys from from the bottom come here with the Zoom, it was incredible. Who can say this?
That's a great example, in fact.
But also Elon Musk is a genius. He has a lot of, today has a lot of, but I remember a discussion 4 years ago with CEOs of coming from the automobile fields, and no one say he could do this job because it was a market very difficult, the automobile field. And today we have Tesla and what. So I think that this is a very important message for our young people, because I think that the human touch is very important. It's more than what the big aspect, and also maybe some investors say to them. Because there is a market for everything if you are able to take the good initiative, and the execution is fundamental.
Absolutely, absolutely. And going back to your point, I was thinking that, for example, now everybody, of course, is concerned about Amazon power. Back 20 years ago, even important magazines like The Economist were concerned about the power of Walmart, which was, the dominant player in the retailing business, right? And then we have developed the new technology, and, Walmart is there, of course, and it's a great player in the United States. They also have their online activity, but everything is about Amazon, and everyone is concerned about the market power. So basically, what I'm saying is that we should be concerned, of course, that we have, of course, institutions like the antitrust that monitor this kind of activity and so on and so forth. there is a broad issue of privacy, which is a very fundamental issue that we also should also consider, of course, when we talk about the market power of these digital giants. But that wouldn't be, in my view, an element that should dissuade people from pursuing their own idea. As you mentioned, these couple of examples are good examples that demonstrates that even the tiny entrepreneur can become super strong.
We have a question about the cities. Let me say the COVID impact on the cities. Thank you for the speech, very interesting. Thank you very much. What do you think about the recent workers' migration from big cities to the countryside? What is the impact for our economy, and do you think it will be sustainable for the future?
So that's a very important question, which again brings in the topic of sustainability challenges that I was mentioning before. So there's plenty to invent in terms of mobility, in terms of all technology, that robotics that can support this activity. This is what I was mentioning as the sustainability challenges. This is for sure a potential threat for big cities. Before the pandemic, this was something very different from pre and post-COVID, because before COVID, we were thinking about what we call the city-states, right? So the notion that now, cities were becoming more important than the very country that was hosting them. So you have Paris, London, Milan, in the case of Italy, and so on and so forth. Clearly, of course, this pandemic is putting into discussion this model. I think that it will depend a lot on how we'll deal with that in the next months. Clearly, the news, for example, that yesterday Boris Johnson decided to lock down for 6 months, to close the international traffic. The United Kingdom is an important news that goes again in the direction that next month will be not very simple for most of us, and clearly a city like London will suffer. Of course, if you can do smart working and you have to every day commute 3 hours, it doesn't make a lot of sense. You prefer to do smart working and you prefer living in the countryside instead of downtown London. I don't know, that's a very fair question. I personally think that the evolution of the species is part of the evolution also of technologies. So we have been good enough to create new scientific innovations. And I think that it is hard for me to think that big metropolitan cities will not exist anymore like they have existed in the way they have existed so far. For sure, we need better technologies that support us in the day-to-day life. And so starting from, again, what we are seeing, for example, here in Milan, so stronger use of, electric scooter, better use of bikes, of technologies that can support distancing in a way that current technologies do not. And again, this is the fundamental space of the inventions for the future, which I think would have a market right away, like the market that you mentioned of Zoom. So to develop something that easy the transportation and allow physical distancing with transportation in a way that is consistent with the sustainability would be something extremely important. So I personally think that this is a very good question with a very difficult answer. But I believe that the cities will still there, and we have to bring in the right technologies to continue the path that we have been living.
A question not really related to COVID, but is a good question. What do you think about the future of cryptocurrency? I think that your finance and tech background come out here.
So that's an interesting question. This is a very complicated topic. This is a really very complicated topic for which I don't have a clear answer. Cryptocurrency, the value of a currency before digital technology as always, so let me put it in this way, like we see, we teach it at our students. So a coin or a piece of paper with $1 or €5 is as value because it is legitimized to have value. And this legitimation comes from a state, okay? And come from a series of institutional agreements between states and their central banks and da-da-da. Cryptocurrency is something that bypasses this legitimation, which brings to the big question mark, okay? So clearly it's an innovation, it's a very important innovation, but it deals with something which is kind of very peculiar and potentially, if you wish, if you take it to the extreme, extremely scary also, because then it's very hard to. So this is for sure an important innovation we've had in the field of digital technology. I don't have a very strong opinion on its future. For sure, what I hope is that important institutional actors will try to coordinate and orchestrate the way they are used, because otherwise then the risk is what happens, right? So currently most of it is used for black markets, for things that are not good at all. And so again, it has a lot of potential, but it has to be still identified and circumscribed in order to really understand how we can use it properly.
Yes, and let me also say it's not so a green technology, because if you think all the amount of energy,
this is a very good point. This is a super very good point. The quantity of energy used to print it is incoherent with one of the challenges that I was saying. Absolutely.
Yeah. Another good point, especially here in Italy. And what do you think about the role of CDP in the current times? Does it help, or do you think is there the risk of alienating private investors, especially if they are foreigners?
Well, I think no, it's there to help. Is there to help. As usual, the problem is the connection with politics. Of course, Italy doesn't have an industrial policy, so it's very important that some actor orchestrate part of the policy. And so I think it's important to have an actor which orchestrates part of the investment, but doesn't have to come to this type of conclusion, because if there is the conclusion, that would be super bad. But it's important to care for some investments that sometimes are not orchestrated enough. There are countries here in Europe that are probably better in having this long-term view I was mentioning before, and protecting some kind of investments that are really crucial for their country. I'm thinking about France, for example, as an example, which is quintessential in my view. So I would say that CDP is there to provide this type of help. It was built for that, and so I wouldn't see it negatively necessarily for any specific reason, because its effort makes to me sense. Then, of course, it has to be, as usual, orchestrated with these long-term views that we mentioned before, because otherwise it can become detrimental. But I don't see it per se detrimental.
Yeah, also because we always think to USA as a private, a very big corporation, but how much of innovation could rise up without government investment in USA?
Ministry of Defense, NASA, and so on and so forth.
Public
Absolutely.
money is very important in this field of innovation.
Absolutely, which is one of the problems that we've had historically in Italy, right? So even if you think about that, one of the reasons why we are lagging behind in some fundamental technologies, because we have never had a strong investment in some fundamental activity coming from the government. That's a good point.
So I have to say to you, very thank you. Maybe just the last question is about governance, let me say. Also coming back to big giants, but not only. Can be present a problem of governance in a world that is always smaller, because in a digital world everything is smaller and quicker, and so the reaction of the big corporation against the reaction of government is not the same, for sure. This could be a problem in a reaction also the big pandemic we are facing, but or other matters that could rise in the future.
Well, so, I mean, even this is something that we already know. So there are some big corporations that are becoming, as much as important as some states in the world because their value, their impact. And again, probably this is something that we have seen it already in economic history. I mean, in the last 150 years. That for sure, in this case, it's becoming exacerbated by the fact that now there are plenty of issues that are also involved, including the one that we mentioned before, privacy and so on and so forth. I don't see a problem. If the question is about the problem of democracy, I don't see necessarily as a problem of democracy, even though we have to question a number of things. There is an interesting Netflix series that actually is not a series, it's a documentary that just came out. It's called The Social Dilemma, which is, well, pretty much intriguing on this respect because it makes you wonder and question a number of things. But I want to be positive, and I don't see a problem for democracies. For sure, there is a problem of governance of corporations. That one, yes. So let me put it this way, because the corporations are becoming so much powerful and so much impactful, sometimes more than the states, they need to be governed in such a way that includes in their goals not simply the profit, but also the impact. So that I see as a fundamental problem of governance for the future. And this is, again, one of the challenges that I see when we talk about sustainability. There is also this notion of sustainable capitalism, which is something which is becoming more and more important. Even this is what we teach to our students in these days. Of course, profit is very important because if you don't have profit, your company dies. And so your startup sooner or later has to produce profit, because if you don't produce profit, this is the demonstration that you will never become a unicorn. But in addition to that, we have to put a number of items which are the items of sustainability, so the social impact, the green impact, and so on and so forth. In that respect, I think we have a major challenge for the governance of corporations for the future, because I think that it's more and more important to include these notions, which in the world of finance is called EGS, for example, so investing in environment, green and sustainable companies. So this is something which is debated, and I think that it's already there in the corporate boardrooms of CEOs and C-levels. And I think that this is something that for sure has to change for the future.
Thank you very much. I think we spent all our time. So thank you, Gianmario, for your speech. Thank you for hosting in this wonderful place. And see you soon in the future for our collaboration.
Thank you very much, and good luck to IIT people.